Hey friends, time for another video. This one is long past due. My apologies. I thought I'd get one out faster. But this video, this discussion is about what may be the most disobeyed passage in the entire New Testament, a passage, a command that we find in five different places, in five different books in the New Testament. And yet, in 33 years of being a Christian, I have only seen it obeyed once, which is when I brought it up. I am referring to the infamous Holy Kiss. So, as I mentioned the command to give one another a holy kiss comes up in five different spots. The spots I'll put them up on the screen. Romans 16:16 says, "Greet one another with a holy kiss." 1 Corinthians 16:20, greet one another with a holy kiss. And there's three more: 2 Corinthians 13:12, 1 Thessalonians 5:26, and 1 Peter 5:14. So, uh, you may ask yourself, you maybe don't ask yourself, why don't we give one another a holy kiss when the Bible so clearly tells us that we should be? Well, if you've been around a while, this you may have had brief little discussions about this topic. I've been a Christian for 33 years, and the only times that this has ever been tossed out is kind of kind of like a joke. Hey, why aren't we giving one another a holy kiss? And the standard answer, which you've probably heard or understood, is that, well, that's a cultural thing. It's something that's done in the Middle East and in that European part of the world, Italy, Greece, those areas, which were where a lot of the New Testament was written. So um, but we don't live in that area. We live in the United States. I mean, not all of you may be living in the United States, but the discussions I've had have been with people in the United States. And that's the standard, quick answer. And there's never a discussion about it because at least in the United States, we all feel a little weird about it. We'd feel weird giving each other a holy kiss. We don't even know what that would look like outside of our, understanding of what we've seen in movies or that sort of thing. So, but here's the question, and here's why I'm bringing it up. Um, why? Why do we interpret those passages in that way where we say, well, it's just cultural, it doesn't apply to us, that's not something that God really wants us to be doing? The reality is, each of those passages, they do come up at the end of each of those books in some sort of a benediction or closing statements, or sometimes Paul's doing greetings or, saying hi to different people at the end of the book, and he will give a few statements. Of course, the last one that I mentioned is in the book of First Peter. Um, but why? What is our basis for not following that passage and looking at the holy kiss as a command? Because it's certainly stated like a command. So I just want to delve into that. It's a little bit, lighthearted, but also I think it's a really healthy question to ask ourselves because what we can find is that without realizing it, we read certain passages a certain way without really thinking about how they apply or why we're understanding it the way we are. So, just wanted to talk briefly about that. So, why don't we follow that command? Well, I think as I've said, you could make an argument that it's not just we don't just follow it because of a cultural issue, but it's kind of a minor command. It's always at the end of those books, and usually around other greetings and things that we don't take literally. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, right? So we can't do that. We don't look at that and say, I've got to, you know, pray and greet Priscilla and Aquila in heaven. We don't take those passages literally. And the Holy Kiss is amongst a lot of those passages. At the same time, some of those passages we do take literally. First Thessalonians 5 has a whole lot of, pray continually type of passages, short, sweet, but hey, do this, don't do that, those sorts of things. So again, this is just sort of more than anything, I think, a way for us to just a little tongue in cheek, but really to just say why. Why do we read it that way? And I think it introduces some humility for us in the way that we interpret passages. Um, so, as we've said, the most common discussion of why we don't give one another a holy kiss is because of the cultural component. Yet none of those passages have anything in them that direct us in that way, that it's a cultural thing. It's just a straight, flat command. So somehow we've concluded that those do not apply to us, at least in the United States. I'm really curious if people in, those other parts of the world where a kiss in greeting is more common. I think a kiss on the cheek. Um, I'm curious if some of our friends who either live there or who have, intimate knowledge of that part of the world, wonder how they view those passages. But at least for us in the U.S., we'd be weirded out if we were giving each other a holy kiss. I also will point out those passages don't say anything about this happening at church. Again, as in my previous video, I think we tend to churchize a lot of passages and just assume that they're happening at church. And the first video I did was on First Timothy 2. And I make the argument that we should consider whether First Timothy 2 is actually taking place in church, since it doesn't refer to a church service. Same thing here in the Holy Kiss. It just says greet one another. And again, I'm going to assume that Paul's assuming we don't just see each other at church. We see each other, around town, in each other's homes, at church, doing different. So, not just at church. There's also, by the way, no distinction of whether it should stick to men giving other men a holy kiss and women, or men and women, and of course, again, in our culture in the U.S., all of that would be weird. None of that would be okay, right? And so, here's my point. I think that in the US, at least in terms of how we've interpreted that passage, we've said, in essence, if we put that passage into practice the way it talks about, it would ultimately hinder the gospel. We would People would be weirded out. They wouldn't want to come to church, and maybe the brothers and sisters, it might create some challenges for them in terms of purity, or maybe being attracted to somebody, or just being weirded out by the whole idea. So we've adopted, very quietly, subtly, not even consciously, maybe. We just kind of skip over those passages and say, those don't apply to us. And my point is, there's nothing, explicit that sort of gives us permission to do that in our interpretation. And yet we've sort of made this decision that if we are going to implement those things, it's not going to be a good thing. And so I say all that to say, I think we're making the right decision there. I think that is the right conclusion, that if Paul were here with us today, he would say, no, 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 don't, don't do a holy kiss for all those reasons. Ultimately, that the gospel would be hindered because of it. But I'm also saying that in a lot of other discussions about issues, we don't conduct ourselves with that same level of thinking. And again, this sort of directly correlates to the First Timothy 2 passage as we're talking about women's role within the church. And I'm not trying to make an exact conclusion on that, but again, I'm just trying to say that it should open the discussion up a little bit. That here's something that comes up in several books of the Bible that we have without clear interpretive rules just decided that doesn't apply to us when there's nothing there that says that it shouldn't. We've just concluded that. And so, and my guess is if we really start digging into some of those passages, there are going to be things that we tend to just skip over, that if we followed the same rule throughout the Bible, we'd find ourselves in trouble. And so there is I think, some mature thinking that God wants us to be able to have when we interpret the scriptures. Um, yeah, that's kind of my point regarding the holy kiss. I'll also say this. One of the passages that comes to mind when I think about um, how God wants Christians to not be so boxed in is in First Corinthians 5. So Paul's writing to the church in Corinth, and the Corinth church has written to Paul with some questions about some issues, and one of the issues is this immoral man in chapter 5. And I'm not sure, I don't remember if there's anything that tells us what their question was, but Paul's response back and it seems as if the church in Corinth was being very permissive with sin. And Paul's response back was, in essence, why haven't you dealt with this? Why is this guy still with you? Expel the immoral man. And I think it's interesting because here's the situation. And obviously, this is the very start, of Christianity. There's not a New Testament per se to fall back on. But Paul's response was, why haven't you just made the obvious decision, the obvious choice to get that guy out of here? That is unhealthy for your church. You're tolerating sin. You should have taken care of this already. Were there explicit directions that the Corinthian church had about that? I don't think they did. It was just kind of obvious, is how Paul seemed to think. So I just say that again to say sometimes I think God wants us to not get trapped in kind of word games, but to make some obvious choices in the ways that we interpret passages. And I understand some of these, difficult topics may not seem obvious. But what I am saying is that I think God gives us some leeway in trying to figure out what's best for the church. And that's ultimately what I think Paul was concerned with, seeing the gospel spread. And I think that's what our main focus should be today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to work on some more in-depth studies I wanted to share with you guys, but that's it for the Holy Kiss. Hope you enjoyed that. No pressure to go out and give any holy kisses. In fact, I'd encourage you not to, but that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.